They scoffed at her battle plan in training. She turned their lesson into their worst mistake. The holodisplay was already up when I walked in. My plan, my semester thesis, hanging in the air in the middle of the briefing room like evidence at a trial. 43 alien cadets were seated in tiered rows, and every single one of them turned to look at me when the door opened. Rear instructor Davos stood at the center console with a laser pointer. He was Kreth, broad-shouldered, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes that never all looked in the same direction at the same time. He had 3 academic doctorates, 2 compact service commendations, and a way of explaining someone's failure that made it feel like a gift. He was not done giving. "Ah," he said, "Cadet Maris, you are precisely on time. We were just beginning." I took my seat. My plan glowed in the air above us all. He had labeled it. Case File 7H, Human Tactical Irrationality as Instructional Example. He had a slide for the label. He had a slide. I opened my notebook, paper, actual paper, the kind that made every alien in the room look at me like I had shown up to a starfight with a butter knife, and I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Then I underlined it. Then I looked up at my plan and started taking notes. "The central logic of this proposal," Davos said, drawing a slow circle around my command structure with the pointer, "is what humans call asymmetric sacrifice, the deliberate exposure of a unit to draw enemy fire, while a secondary force executes the primary objective." He paused. He looked at the class. "Can anyone identify the structural problem?" 3 hands went up, all alien. I wrote structural problem. A Mirathi cadet named Osek, the best natural pilot in the program, completely uninterested in theory, did not raise his hand. He was drawing something on his datapad. He caught my eye and gave me a small, sympathetic tilt of his chin. I filed that under useful. "The problem," Davos continued, without waiting for the raised hands, "is that this plan treats a living unit as expendable by design. It builds the loss of your own people into the architecture of the mission. It is not strategy. It is desperation wearing a uniform." The class wrote that down. I wrote it down too. He kept going. Every assumption I had made, he named. Every logical leap I had taken, he grounded. He was not cruel about it. He was worse. He was careful. He pointed at the secondary force vector and explained why it would arrive 12 seconds too late if the drawing unit held position correctly, and if they did not hold position correctly, the entire operation collapsed at the source. 12 seconds. He had done the math. He had put the math on a slide. By the time he was done, the plan had been taken apart in front of 43 cadets, cataloged, labeled, and archived as a teaching tool for every incoming class for the next 3 academic cycles. He announced that last part near the end, casually, like it was a courtesy. I wrote 3 academic cycles. Underlined it. "Any questions for Cadet Maris?" Davos asked. A Kreth cadet in the second row, careful, precise, the kind of student who quoted doctrine the way other people breathe, raised his hand. Was this plan submitted in good faith? The room got quiet. I answered before Davos could. "Yes," I said, "it was." Nobody laughed. That was the worst part, actually. Nobody laughed. They just looked at me with a kind of careful sympathy, the way you look at someone who has walked into a wall and is pretending they meant to. Davos nodded once. "Good faith is not the same as good planning," he said. "The Academy respects one. It requires the other." Class ended. I stayed in my seat while the other cadets filed out, not because I was upset, because I was not finished writing. Davos erased the display and my plan disappeared from the air. He walked to his console, pulled up his files, and I watched him archive case file 7H under the Human Irrationality Index. He did not look at me while he did it. He did not think I was watching. I was always watching. A Kreth female cadet stopped beside my row on her way out. Her name was Sevath. She was the most precise thinker in the program, possibly in the sector, and she had the warmth of a steel wall in winter, which, somehow, I found completely comfortable. "Your secondary force vector was correct," she said. "The timing was wrong." I looked at her. "I know." She nodded once and left. I sat with that for a moment. The timing was wrong. I closed my notebook, tucked it under my arm, and walked out into the corridor. The station hummed around me. Verath Station, joint species, mid-sector, the kind of place that existed specifically so that humans and Kreth and Myrathi and 7 other species could learn to fight alongside each other without any of them having to pretend they were the same. I stopped at the corridor window. Stars, a lot of them. There was a question I had not asked in the briefing room. I had held it back because asking it would have told Davos too much. It sat in me now like a stone in still water. What happens when the enemy has read your doctrine? What happens when they know exactly what a perfectly trained compact fleet will do, because you published it, labeled it, and taught it in rooms full of students who write everything down? I looked at the stars. I started filing that under the actual lesson. I thanked Davos the next morning, formally, correctly. He accepted it with a brief nod and told me he expected improvement in the next cycle. "Yes, sir," I said. I meant I already started. The humiliation went into the notebook, right next to the date, right next to structural problem, right next to 3 academic cycles and the math about the 12 seconds. I had a lot of pages left. 18 months is a long time to be underestimated. It is also, if you are paying attention, a long time to learn. I want to be clear about something. I was not plotting anything dramatic. I was not nursing a grievance or counting the days until some reversal of fortune. I had exactly zero interest in revenge as a concept. Revenge is what people choose when they run out of better options. I had better options. The first thing I did, the morning after the Case File 7H briefing, was pull every published paper Davos had ever written. There were 17 of them. I read them in order. Not for content. I had already absorbed most of the content in his classes. I read them for structure, for the way he thought, for the load-bearing assumptions underneath his logic, the ones so foundational he never bothered to name them because he had never been in a room where anyone would think to challenge them. He was brilliant. I want to give him that cleanly, no qualifiers. His understanding of fleet engagement theory was the best I had ever encountered, and I had been reading military history since I was 14 years old, sitting in my father's workshop in rural Ohio, studying tactics on a tablet while my dad fixed engines 3 feet away and called it babysitting. Davos was brilliant. He was also building on a foundation that had one very specific crack. All of his doctrine, every elegant, rigorously tested, beautifully mapped piece of it, was designed to fight an enemy that operated the way the compact operated. An enemy with fixed command structures, doctrine-bound response patterns, and a preference for overwhelming force concentration at strategic points. It was doctrine designed to defeat itself. I wrote that in the notebook, circled it. Then I went to morning formation and did not say a word about it. The next 18 months looked, from the outside, like a model career. I scored in the top 2% of every tactical assessment. My plans were clean, elegant, and completely within doctrine parameters. Davos used 3 of them as positive examples in class, one of them in the same instructional slot where Case File 7H used to run, which I noted and did not mention. Sevath noticed, though. "You are performing," she said one afternoon, in the kind of flat, observational tone she used for everything from weather to warfare. We were in the station's common area. She was eating. I was reading. It was a whole arrangement we had developed. She had been watching me complete a practice tactical assessment with what she apparently felt was suspicious efficiency. I looked up. "Am I?" "You are answering the questions they want answered," she said. not the questions you would ask. I thought about that for a moment. Are those different questions? You know they are. I closed my assessment pad. Sevath. Maris. If I told you I was taking extremely detailed notes on every structural assumption, underlying compact tactical doctrine, and that I was specifically mapping the scenarios in which that doctrine would fail, would you consider that a problem? She ate a spoonful of whatever Kreth consumed for protein. Set the spoon down. That depends entirely on who you intend to share those notes with. Nobody, I said, yet. She picked the spoon back up. Then no, she said, I would consider it thorough. That was as close to approval as Sevath ever came. I filed it immediately under high praise. Asek, by contrast, did not notice anything. Asek was aware of approximately 3 things at any given time: flight vectors, structural stress tolerances on whatever craft he happened to be sitting in, and whether there was food available. He was the best natural pilot in any species in the program, possibly in the history of the program, and he achieved this by being constitutionally incapable of overthinking anything. I valued him enormously for it. He also flew every simulated exercise I designed without asking why I was building them the way I was building them. He just flew. And when I said, "That approach vector, can you hold it under fire for 11 seconds instead of breaking off at 7?" he would tilt his head, calculate something I could not see, and say, "Yes. What am I drawing fire away from?" "Everything," I said once. He shrugged. "Fine." Diego Reyes arrived in our unit in the 4th month of my 2nd year. He was from Houston, human, 24 years old, and afraid of nothing except disappointing the people around him, which made him, in terms of useful people to have beside you, extraordinarily effective. He was assigned to close-range tactical operations, and he was so good at it that it looked simple when he did it. He also brought real coffee from Earth, twice, which elevated him immediately to a category that transcended rank. The 4 of us, Sevath, Asek, Diego, and me, were not officially a unit. We were just 4 people who ended up in the same spaces, studying the same problems from 4 completely different angles, until the angles started fitting together in ways none of us had planned for. Sevath provided precision. Everything she touched became a tighter version of itself. Asek provided the ability to execute the physically impossible parts. Diego provided a stubborn certainty that whatever I planned could actually work, which, in the moments when I was not sure of myself, was the difference between planning and pretending. I provided the notebook. In the 14th month, Davos called me into his office for a one-on-one review. He went through my recent work with the particular satisfaction of someone who had watched a struggling student improve. His assessment was genuine. He told me I had developed discipline. He told me I had learned to work within a system. "Yes, sir," I said. "I meant I have learned your system completely. I know every room in it. I know where the walls are and I know where they are thin." He did not hear that part. People rarely hear the parts you do not say. He asked me how I had improved, what had changed between the cadet who had submitted case file 7H and the officer sitting across from him now. I told him I had studied his published work carefully. He nodded and said something about the value of learning from experienced practitioners. I agreed. That afternoon, I sat alone at an archive terminal and pulled case file 7H, my plan. My old, archived, labeled 3 cycles of instructional use plan. I read it slowly, all the way through. The timing problem was there, the one Sevath had named. The secondary force vector was correct, but the window was wrong, 12 seconds too narrow under standard enemy response time. I thought about that phrase for a while. Standard enemy response time. That phrase, that assumption sitting there in the foundation of the critique like a load-bearing wall nobody had checked. If the enemy responded in standard time, which was the only kind of time that existed in doctrine-built scenarios, The plan failed. But what if they did not respond in standard time? What if they were too busy learning? What if their response architecture was designed to gather data before it acted, meaning they needed the bait unit to stay visible longer, which meant they would not commit force until the window had already stretched well past 12 seconds, into territory where my secondary force would arrive exactly when it was supposed to. I sat with that for a long time. The plan was not wrong. It was designed for the wrong enemy. I wrote that in the notebook, 3 words underlined once. Wrong enemy yet. Then I went to dinner and did not tell anyone. On the last day of the academic cycle, a briefing flag went out from Compact Command. The Verak hegemony was moving ships toward the outer reaches. Compact Intelligence classified it as political posturing. Davos mentioned it in passing at the end of his final lecture of the year. He said the Compact's response doctrine was fully prepared. He said his cadets could be confident the system worked. I wrote posturing. Then I wrote underneath it, or they are reading the doctrine too. Then I closed the notebook. The next cycle was going to be interesting. The war did not start the way anyone expected. That was the first sign it was serious. Every Compact analyst, every fleet commander, every intelligence officer who had spent the last decade modeling hegemony behavior, they all expected the Verak to strike at military installations. That was what a military force did. You hit the hardware. You targeted the firepower. You made the other side absorb losses where it was armored and dared it to hold together. The Verak did not hit the hardware. They hit the supply chains. They hit the communication relays between the 3rd and 7th Compact fleets. Not the command relays, the logistics relays, the ones so far back in the operational architecture that nobody had flagged them as priority targets, because nobody had built a threat model that treated them as weapons. They hit 3 mid-sector fuel depots on the same day, 6 hours apart, with a precision that said they had been watching those depots for months. They hit the timing. The Compact Doctrine's response to a military strike was, concentrate force, identify primary threat vector, execute overwhelming engagement. It was elegant. It had worked in every simulated engagement, every training scenario, every wargame for 40 years. It needed a military strike to work. What it got instead was a supply chain problem, a communication gap, and 3 fleet engagements that launched on schedule with incomplete information and no fuel contingency. All 3 failed. The briefings that came out of those failures were careful documents. They used words like unexpected operational parameters and evolving threat profile and doctrine adaptation required. What they meant was, we did exactly what we were trained to do and it did not work, and we do not fully understand why yet. I understood why. I had it in the notebook. I did not say this out loud, not because I was sitting on some dramatic reveal, but because being right after the fact is not the same as being useful. I had no intention of wasting the next part of this on being right at someone. I had work to do. By this point I was 3 years out of the academy. Lieutenant Cale Maries, assigned to the 7th Compact Combined Fleet under the command of Rear Admiral Davos, who had been promoted 2 years after I graduated, and had brought his tactical doctrine and his archived case files with him into Flag Command. He still used case file 7H in his briefings. He had told me this himself, with no apparent awareness of how I was receiving the information. It remains an excellent teaching tool, he said. The failure mode is instructive for junior commanders. Yes, sir, I said. I meant I know. I built the failure mode. I just also built the correction. The Verak fought in waves. This was the piece that nobody in Compact Command had fully processed by the time I was sitting in the 4th strategic briefing after the 3 failed engagements. Each wave of Verak units moved forward to engage, absorbed damage, and pulled back, but not before doing something that no compact doctrine model had accounted for. They transmitted. Every Verac unit under fire was collecting data in real time, targeting patterns, response sequences, weapon deployment timing, fleet formation tendencies. They fed it all back to a central intelligence architecture that processed it and updated the next wave's engagement parameters before the current wave had finished retreating. They were learning from combat. Every engagement the compact fought by the doctrine gave the Verac a cleaner read of that doctrine. I had a word for this in the notebook. I had written it 14 months ago. Sitting alone at an archive terminal with case file 7H on the screen. The word was yet. They were the wrong enemy yet. Now they were the right one. In the fourth briefing, the room was full of senior commanders Kreth, Human, Myrathi, 2 Tessari, and every single one of them had a theory about the Verac adaptation. The theories were good. Some were very good. They were all built on the assumption that the correct response was a better version of the same doctrine, tighter force concentration, faster response times, more coordinated targeting. Better doctrine to fight an enemy that learned from doctrine. I sat at the back of the room. Diego was beside me. Sevath was across the table taking notes in her precise shorthand. Asek was somewhere near the door eating. Diego leaned close and kept his voice low. You have that look. What look? The one where you are 15 steps ahead of everyone, and you are waiting to see if anyone else gets there first. Nobody got there. The assignments came at the end of the briefing. Davos distributed mission packages with the efficiency of someone who had complete confidence in his assessment. Every high-priority strategic target, the Verac forward command relay, the flank positioning nodes, the 3 choke points rated as primary interdiction threats, went to the best-equipped units with the most experienced commanders. Doctrine demanded concentration of force at high-value targets. Davos delivered. There was one target left, a choke point his models rated as secondary. Verath 9, a supply junction, mid-sector, positioned at the intersection of 2 low-traffic transit lanes. Compact assessment placed it at a 14% probability of Verac operational interest. 14%. He gave it to me. Not because of anything I had planned or built or prepared. He gave it to me because someone had to cover it. His best units were allocated to primary targets, and the expected outcome at a 14% probability secondary position was nothing dramatic. He said it like he was reading a logistics report. Lieutenant Maris, Verath 9, 3 patrol units, 2 support craft, pilot Asek on detached assignment. Hold the junction until the primary engagements resolve. Yes, sir, I said. I sat very still for a moment. 3 patrol units, 2 support craft, Asek. A supply junction that compact doctrine rated as an afterthought. By my math, not doctrine math, my math, notebook math, 14 months of reading Verac decision architecture. This junction was going to become the most strategically interesting piece of ground in the sector, the moment the Verac Central Intelligence finished processing data from the primary engagements and started looking for what the compact was protecting too lightly. A learning system always looks for the gap. Davos had just assigned me to stand inside one. I walked out of the briefing room. Diego fell into step beside me. Seveth materialized from somewhere to my left, which she did sometimes, and I had stopped questioning. Asek caught up from behind, still eating. Verath 9, Diego said. Verath 9, I said. 14%, Seveth said. Not for long, I said. Asek swallowed whatever he was eating. What am I flying? I told him. He calculated for 2 seconds. That is not a standard flight profile. No, I said. Can it be done? He thought for one more second. Yes. Good, I said. I need you to hold it under direct Verac targeting fire for 11 seconds. The pattern has to look like compact doctrine response, but not quite. Exactly wrong enough to teach them a false lesson. Exactly right enough that they believe it is real. He tilted his head. How wrong is wrong enough? I will show you the numbers, I said. You tell me if your hands can hit them. He was quiet. Then, that is a very strange plan. Thank you, I said. Seveth looked at me. She had seen the notebook 100 times. She looked at it now with the expression she used when she was solving the final variable in a calculation. The timing, she said. You corrected the timing. I found the right enemy, I said. She nodded once, clean and final, the way she agreed with conclusions she had fully checked. We kept walking. The station corridor stretched ahead of us, and the stars through the port window were the same stars I had looked at 3 years ago, the morning after a laser pointer and a holodisplay, and a slide about human tactical irrationality. I had a worn paper notebook in my hand. I had the right enemy ahead of me. I had a plan that was no longer early. We reached Vareth 9:14 hours before the primary engagements began. I want to tell you it looked like something. A forbidding installation. A piece of the universe that announced itself as the place where everything was about to change. It did not. It was a supply junction at the intersection of 2 low-traffic transit lanes in the middle of empty space, and it looked like exactly what compact doctrine said it was. A secondary target at 14% probability. That was the point. I gave my team one briefing, not for dramatic effect because one briefing was all I had time for and all they needed. Seveth had already worked through half the plan on the walk to the ship. Asek knew his part. Diego knew his. I stood in front of 3 patrol unit commanders, Owen Chen, Petra Vale, and Nadia Sloan, and I told them the truth, which was not something most commanders did before a combat assignment. The Varak Central Intelligence learns by watching us fight, I said. Every unit we have sent against them in standard doctrine response has given them better information. By the time the primary engagements start, they will have built a model of exactly how a compact fleet responds to pressure. That model will be accurate, and when it is accurate enough, they will look for the gap in our coverage. I let that settle. Vareth 9 is the gap, I said, not because it is unimportant, because the compact has told them it is unimportant. Secondary listing, minimal defense allocation. To the Varak intelligence, this junction is an exposed position worth investigating. Owen leaned forward. He was a careful, deliberate man, 28, compact-born, the kind of commander who needed the logic before he committed to anything. So we are the bait, he said. No, I said, you are the lesson, there is a difference. I walked them through the plan. The real one, not case file 7H as it had been archived and labeled and used as an instructional tool for 3 academic cycles. Version 2.6, rebuilt from the foundation for one specific enemy with one specific way of thinking. The original plan's flaw had been timing. The secondary force arrived 12 seconds too late because the plan assumed a standard enemy response. The Varak would not respond in standard time. They were designed to observe first, to collect information before committing, to feed data back to their central intelligence and wait for it to process before pushing force forward. That wait was my 12 seconds, my correction. The plan needed the bait unit to stay visible and read as compact doctrine consistent long enough for the Varak intelligence to classify the situation, begin transmitting, and start committing to a tactical decision. Asek's approach pattern built to look almost like doctrine, close enough to register as a standard compact response, wrong in ways precise enough to update their model toward a false conclusion, would push that classification window from 7 seconds to somewhere between 15 and 20. My secondary force needed 11. We had room. Seveth had checked the room 4 times. I trusted the 4th check. There will be a moment, I told Owen, Petra, and Nadia, where it feels like you are out there alone, where the timeline looks wrong and the support seems like it is not coming. I am telling you now, the timeline is exact. Hold your position. Do not break pattern. If you break pattern early, you give the Varak something they can classify, the whole read shifts and the plan collapses. Owen held my eyes. And if the timing is wrong after all? Then we lose Varath 9, I said. But we lose it because the enemy is smarter than I calculated, not because the plan was broken. And if that turns out to be true, we need to know it. He considered that. I am not wrong about the timing, I said. He nodded slowly. All right. Petra Vale was quieter than Owen, a precision-minded woman who had been in 3 prior engagements and had the particular stillness of someone who had already made peace with difficult outcomes before they arrived. She asked one thing. My unit is the first draw. Yes. We hold position and run the decoy window the full length. Yes. Then the support closes. Yes. She nodded, understood. Nadia Sloan was the youngest of the 3, 23 years old, fast and instinctive, the kind of pilot whose reflexes were so good she had to work actively against them in situations that required stillness rather than speed. I had noticed this in the simulations I had designed over the previous weeks. I had built a deliberate pause into her part of the pattern specifically because of it. A moment of apparent hesitation that would read as compact training response and give her something precise to execute instead of something to hold back. I had designed the plan around the people running it. That was the part Davos's critique had never reached. The Varak arrived 4 hours into the primary engagement window. Not a probe, a full tactical strike package. 6 combat units in Varak heavy configuration, angled in from the transit lane exactly where the junction's defensive data said a lightly covered compact secondary position would sit. Their model was very good. It was also built entirely on everything the compact had spent 3 years teaching them. I was at the command console when they came in. Sevath was beside me on the data feed. Diego was with his team in the station's lower corridor. Osek was in his ship. I opened the channel. They are inbound. Classification window starts now. Understood, Osek said. Then, this is still a strange plan. Yes, I said. I like it, he said. From Osek, that was a complete tactical endorsement. Petra's unit moved first. Right on mark. Clean and doctrine consistent. Exactly the forward defense deployment the Varak model would recognize and begin processing. They held position in the draw pattern, staying visible, presenting the profile of a standard compact response force, doing exactly what a standard compact response force would do. I watched the Varak unit slow. There it was. They were not firing. They were gathering. The forward Varak units pulled back just slightly, not retreating, not advancing, hovering at the edge of engagement range, transmitting, pulling the junction's entire defensive picture back to the central intelligence. 14 seconds. I watched the feed. 15. Osek's approach rolled in. To a compact analyst, it would look like a slightly miscalibrated response pattern, a pilot running a sequence that had a visible gap in the third movement. To the Varak model, processing the junction data in real time, it would look like a position that could be exploited if force was committed at the right angle and speed. The gap did not exist. Osek was flying a constructed image. There was no opening, but the pattern was precise enough, wrong in exactly the measured direction, that the Varak intelligence would classify one as real. 17 seconds. The Varak committed. All 6 units pushed forward, hard and fast, targeting the angle in Osek's pattern exactly as designed. Now, I said. Nadia's unit came in at a vector the Varak model had never been given information on, because the compact had never used it in any prior engagement in this conflict. Because it was not in the doctrine. Because I had built it for this exact moment and put it in the hands of the one pilot fast enough to execute it cold under fire. Owen's unit closed from the opposite direction. Petra held her position and let the Varak forward units push past her into a space where their data said there was nothing waiting. There was everything waiting. What happened next took 43 seconds. I will not dress it up. In those 43 seconds we lost one patrol craft. Owen's wing took significant damage. Nadia took a hit on her third movement that she corrected for so cleanly, I almost did not register it until she reported it afterward, calm as someone describing weather. We held Vareth 9. All 6 Varak units pulled back, not because we outgunned them, because the engagement had not matched their model. And when a learning system encounters data that contradicts its model, it does not press the action. It retreats. It reprocesses. They retreated. They transmitted everything they had recorded. And somewhere in the Varak Central Intelligence, in that vast, learning, constantly adapting architecture that had absorbed 3 compact fleet engagements and grown sharper from each one, a new data point entered the system. A compact position that had not behaved like a secondary target. A defense pattern that matched nothing in the catalog. A gap that had not been a gap. The intelligence flagged it. I had counted on this. A learning system does not dismiss an anomaly. An anomaly is a model failure. The system's entire purpose is to have no model failures, so it commits processing capacity and tactical attention to the anomaly until it resolves it. 30% of the Varak Central Intelligence's active tactical capacity shifted toward Vareth 9. Away from the primary engagements. Away from the 3 compact fleets that had been fighting by the doctrine against an enemy that had learned the doctrine well enough to use it against them. Sevath looked up from the feed. She said nothing for a moment. Then, the primary engagement data is shifting. I was already reading it. The compact fleets, Davos's units, doctrine perfect and outpaced for 3 weeks, were no longer facing the same enemy they had been facing an hour ago. Varak response times had slowed. Wave adaptations had gaps. The learning architecture was occupied. It was analyzing Vareth 9. Diego appeared in the doorway. There was a small cut above his eyebrow that he had apparently not noticed. "We held it," he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at the feed. He looked at me. "You knew the Varak would shift capacity from the primary engagements." "I knew they could not leave an anomaly unresolved," I said. "A system designed to learn cannot ignore something it cannot explain. The moment I gave it a Vareth 9 worth studying, it was going to study Vareth 9. He was quiet for a moment. "And Davos assigned you here because Doctrine said it was unimportant." "Doctrine was built for an enemy that does not fight the way the Varak fight," I said. He could not have known a secondary junction would become the most important ground in the sector. The Doctrine did not have a category for it. "But you did," he said. I thought about a worn paper notebook, 3 years of careful notes, a question asked in an empty corridor while looking at stars. "I filed it under likely," I said. I opened a channel to Compact Command and transmitted the engagement report. The debrief room on Command Station Varath was built for 30. There were 47 people in it. They had been filing in for 20 minutes before I arrived. Senior officers, fleet commanders, 2 compact civilian advisors, and 1 Kreth Rear Admiral who stood at the head of the primary display table with his hands clasped behind his back, and an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not satisfaction. Processing. Davos was running the numbers. I could tell by the stillness of him, the way all 4 eyes had converged on a single point in the display, a thing he only did when something had broken a pattern he trusted. He was a rigorous man, a careful man, a man who had built his professional architecture on the premise that good doctrine correctly applied, produced predictable outcomes. The outcomes from the last 18 hours were not in any of his predictions. I took my seat at the far end of the table. Diego sat beside me. Seveth arrived and settled across from me with the composure of someone who had already processed everything and was waiting for the room to arrive at the same place. Asek was not present. Asek was eating somewhere. I had made peace with this. The room came to order when Davos moved to the main display. The engagement summary filled the screen. All of it, the 3 prior failed fleet actions, the overnight shift in Verak tactical capacity, the 7th Fleet's recovery at the primary choke points, the holding action at Vareth 9. He had arranged it chronologically. He had run the full analysis. He let the room read it for 1 full minute without speaking. This was unusual. Davos did not use silence. He used precision. Every second of his briefings had a placement and a purpose. Silence was not in his method. He was using it now. The senior officers around the table were doing what careful people do with surprising data. They were recalculating. I watched it move through the room in small, controlled ways. A jaw tightening here, a slight shift of posture there. A Myrathi commander who went very still in the specific way that meant she had arrived at the number, and the number was not what any model had predicted. The number was Vareth 9. A secondary target, 14% probability, 3 patrol units, 2 support craft, and a lieutenant with a paper notebook. 6 Varak strike units had arrived, engaged, and pulled back, not because the position had outgunned them, but because the engagement had not matched their model. And in pulling back to reprocess, they had shifted 30% of the Varak Central Intelligence's active capacity away from the primary engagements, where compact fleets had been losing for 3 weeks. The math was not complicated once you saw it laid out. It was just that nobody had set it up to be seen. Davos spoke. The Varak adaptation model has been the defining problem in every engagement since this conflict began, he said. They learn from combat. Each wave gathers data and transmits it. The model updates. The next wave engages with better information than the last. We understood this mechanism. He paused. What we had not accounted for was the model's response to information it could not classify. He looked at the display. The Vareth 9 engagement produced an encounter profile that the Varak Central Intelligence had no precedent for. The defense pattern matched nothing in their catalog. The tactical choices made by the unit commander fell outside every parameter their model had been trained on. He was quiet for a moment. The model could not resolve it, and a learning system that cannot resolve an anomaly does the only thing it is designed to do. He looked at the room. It commits to understanding it, above all other priorities. The room was completely silent. The reallocation of Varak tactical capacity from the primary engagement zones to Vareth 9 created the window in which our fleet commanders were able to achieve successful engagements for the first time in this conflict. He stopped. That window was not an accident. It was built. He looked at me. I looked back. There was a long history in that moment. A holodisplay, a laser pointer, a slide about human tactical irrationality, and a plan archived as a failure in front of 43 cadets. 3 years of a notebook, a question that nobody else had thought to ask. He did not look away. Neither did I. Lieutenant Maris, he said, walked the room through the engagement model. Not a request, not a compliment, an assignment. I stood up. I did not bring the notebook to the display. I did not need it. This plan had been in my head every day for 3 years, sitting in the part of the mind where things go when you have thought about them until they become part of how you see. I walked to the display and pulled up the Vareth 9 engagement sequence. I stopped it at the moment of first Varak contact. The Varak Central Intelligence is a learning system, I said. Its function is to gather engagement data, model compact tactical behavior, and adjust each wave's parameters to exploit identified patterns. It is very good at this. I looked at the room. It is good at this because we have been excellent at being predictable. No one moved. Every engagement we have run since the conflict began has been clean, doctrine consistent, and correctly executed by every standard we were trained on. We have given their model exactly what a learning model requires: repeated behavior with identifiable structure. They learned us. They used what they learned. They won. I advanced the feed to Osek's approach. The answer was not to fight better within the doctrine, I said. The answer was to become something the model had never seen. Not random data is noise, and a learning system filters noise. Specifically wrong. Wrong in a controlled direction that the model would attempt to classify, fail to classify cleanly, and then commit resources to resolving. I showed them the pattern, the constructed gap, the angle that read as exploitable and was not. If you give a learning system something it cannot explain, it cannot dismiss it. An unresolved anomaly is a failure of the system's core function. It will pull capacity from every other active process until the anomaly resolves. I looked at Davos. We gave it an anomaly it could not resolve in the engagement window, and it did exactly what it was built to do. I sat down. The room held the quiet for a moment. Then Leon Garrett spoke. He was a human fleet commander, 20 years in the compact service, and he had the particular directness of someone who had lost enough good people to stop caring about being careful with his words. How long have you been working on this? I considered the question honestly. The core mechanism of the plan, the timing correction, the specific behavior of a learning system under unclassifiable data, I have understood for roughly 3 years. The right enemy for the plan arrived when this conflict began. The correct position, the specific location where the plan could produce the secondary effect on the primary engagements, was assigned to me 72 hours ago. Leon looked at Davos. Davos looked at me. You identified Vareth 9 as the correct position before the assignment, Leon asked. No, I said. I identified the type of position, a target the Compact's doctrine classified as low priority, that the Varak intelligence would classify as a gap worth investigating once it had enough of our standard engagement data to feel confident in its model. Vareth 9 fit that profile. Several of the other secondary listed junctions in the current theater would have fit it. But this is the one Davos assigned you, Leon said. I did not fill that silence. I did not need to. Leon understood the shape of it. Everyone in the room understood it. A lieutenant assigned to a secondary target because the primary targets needed the best units, and the gap had to be covered by someone. Someone had to stand in the gap. I had spent 3 years building a plan that only worked from inside one. The silence changed. It moved from the quality of people processing numbers to the quality of people processing something that did not fit any existing category in the way they understood their work. Davos let it sit for 4 seconds. Then he moved to his command console. I watched him open the archive directory, navigate through the file structure with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything lived. He found the Human Tactical Irrationality Index. He found case file 7H. He opened it. He read it, slowly. The full document, the original plan text, the diagrams, the critique, all 3 cycles of instructional annotation that had accumulated around it over the years like footnotes around a contested text. The room watched him. He said without looking up from the screen, "Your original plan, the timing problem Cadet Seveth identified, the 12-second window, you corrected it." "Yes," I said. "When?" "When I identified the correct enemy," I said. "A learning system that needs to classify before it commits does not respond to contact in standard time. It observes first. That observation window extends the timeline by between 8 and 13 seconds depending on data complexity. I used 11 as the operational figure because it sat inside the conservative end of the estimate and gave Nadia's unit margin for execution variance under fire. Sevath spoke from across the table, flat and precise as always. She had run the margin calculation 4 times before deployment. 4 times, Davos said. The 4th was mine, Sevath said. I verified her numbers. He nodded once. He was still looking at case file 7H. He was looking at it the way you look at a conclusion you have held for a long time when the evidence has shifted under it. Not reluctantly, carefully. The way a rigorous person revises because the data changed and the position has to change with it, and there is no version of being honest where you hold the old position anyway. He closed the instructional annotations. He opened the classification field. I watched him change the label. I was at the wrong angle to read the new text. I saw the keystrokes. I saw the pause before the final input, a pause that lasted about 2 seconds, which was, for Davos, the equivalent of a very long time to sit with something. Then I saw the single deliberate movement that committed the new classification to the archive. Case file 7H was no longer what it had been that morning. He closed the console. Dismissed, he said to the room. Chairs moved. Conversation started. The particular sound of a large group of people who had received new information and were beginning to reorganize their understanding of things around it. Leon Garrett stopped beside my chair on his way to the door. He looked at me with the economy of a man who rationed approval because he understood what it was worth. Good plan, he said. Thank you, I said. He left. Diego was already at the door, waiting with the patience he always had when he knew something was not finished yet. Sevath stood, straightened her uniform twice, and said, the 4th margin calculation was not technically necessary. The 3rd was sufficient. I know, I said. You ran the 4th one anyway. Yes, I said. She looked at me with a long, complete Sevath look, not warm in any conventional sense, but entirely real, which I had long since decided was better. That is correct, she said. She left. I was the last one at the table. Just me and Davos, who had not moved from the head of the display. He was looking at the full conflict timeline now, not the Vareth 9 sequence. The whole picture, 3 failed engagements, weeks of losses, the overnight shift, the recovery at the primary choke points. The cost was in the numbers. Real losses at every stage. Real units and real people in the weeks before Vareth 9 where doctrine had been applied correctly, and the Varak had used that correctness against everything the compact was trying to protect. He knew this. He was looking at it directly. I stood. He spoke without turning. You waited 3 years to run this plan. I waited 3 years for the right enemy, I said. He was quiet for a moment. How did you know they would come? He said. I had been carrying that question since the night I left the academy corridor. Since the stars. Since the morning after the holodisplay went dark and my plan went into the archive as a cautionary lesson, and I walked out with a notebook and one question nobody else was asking. I thought about how to answer it honestly. The honest answer was that I had not known, not with certainty. I had looked at the compact's unified tactical doctrine and understood that it was built to fight a mirror of itself. Any force willing to study that doctrine carefully enough, patiently enough, would eventually show up with the tools to use it against the people who wrote it. That was not a prediction. That was reading. Because you taught a room full of people exactly how your doctrine works, I said. And someone, someday, was going to be taking notes for different reasons. He turned then, looked at me directly, all 4 eyes converged. The way he looked at things he was fully committed to understanding. The notebook, he said. The notebook, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. I taught you to find structural failures in tactical plans, he said. I did not consider that you would apply that method to mine. You taught me very well, I said. There was something in his face that was not quite what a human expression would do in that moment, because he was not human, and the Kreth equivalent of recognizing that a lesson and its consequence were the same lesson, that the tool you built had been carried by someone you overlooked into the exact situation where it mattered. Whatever that looked like on a Kreth face, it was there now. There was a genuine flaw in the original plan, I said. Not the timing. The timing was solvable once I had the right enemy. The real flaw was that it required a specific type of opponent the Academy's doctrine had not prepared me to expect. I paused. I did not understand what that opponent looked like until I sat in that room for 18 months and learned exactly how a learning system gets trained, what it needs, what it cannot ignore. What happens when you give it something it cannot resolve? He said nothing. You built the lesson, I said. I just took it home. He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded, once, clean and final, the way Kreth acknowledged things they had fully processed and would not revisit. There was no apology in it. Apology was not built into the Kreth language in any direct form. But there was something else. Something that sat in the space where an apology would have been if the language had room for one. An acknowledgement of the full weight of the record, of what case file 7H had been and what it was now. I walked to the door. I did not look back at the console. I did not need to know the new label. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What mattered was not the words of the classification. What mattered was that the classification had changed because the evidence had changed. And the evidence had changed because, for 3 years, a lieutenant assigned to a secondary target had been keeping careful notes. Diego was in the corridor. He had a cup in each hand, real coffee, Earth origin, Houston imported in his kit for the moments that required something small and human and real. He held one out. I took it. Vareth 9 held, he said. Vareth 9 held, I said. We stood there in the corridor for a moment. The station hummed around us. Somewhere behind us the war was not over. The Varak would process Vareth 9, eventually understand the shape of what had happened there and adapt. That was what they did. They were good at it. The next problem was already forming somewhere in their central intelligence, working through the anomaly, looking for the new pattern. Owen Chen had sent a message after the debrief ended. 3 words, you called it. Petra Vale had sent 1 word, clean. Nadia Sloan had not sent anything yet. She was asleep. She had been awake for 41 hours and had corrected for battle damage under fire on a 3rd movement pass with the calm of someone who had decided to trust the plan and found out the plan was worth trusting. I drank the coffee. I opened the notebook to the last written page. The final entry was 14 months old, 2 words underlined once. Wrong enemy yet. I took the pen from my jacket pocket. I crossed out yet. I wrote the date underneath. I wrote Vareth 9 held. Then 3 more words, underneath everything, at the bottom of the page. I closed the notebook. Diego finished his coffee. What now? I thought about a learning intelligence pulling 30% of its capacity toward an anomaly it could not resolve. I thought about what happened when it finished processing Vareth 9 and arrived at the only conclusion the data supported, that someone had fed it a lesson it was supposed to learn, and the lesson was not real. That was not an ending. That was the next problem. Now, I said, I start a new notebook.